You won't be flying through stars this time tonight. You'll be drifting downward, slowly into something older than galaxies, quieter than moonlight on bone. The kind of silence that presses against your chest like deep water remembering. A name you've never spoken aloud, beneath all storms, below the wrecks and wails and songs. A cradle waits, not made of wood, not rocked by hands, but shaped by pressure and patience. That's where he curled, not born screaming, not born. Blinking but exhaled maybe by the ocean itself. No midwife attended. Only tectonic shifts in a ripple in salt. The myths say he is Loki's son. A serpent long enough to loop the world, yet slow enough to dream between heartbeats. But before names were whispered, before gods threw glances, at maps, he was just there. UNCOILING. The sea does not remember birthdays, only pressure points and temperature changes. And somewhere between those, the first scale shimmered, tiny, inevitable, not monstrous yet only possible. The kind of possible that makes tide pools pause and trenches go quiet. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Dim the lights. Let this story arrive as it first did, from the bottom up. Let it take its time. The first heartbeat takes centuries, and no one's in a rush. You're not here to be told what happened. You're here to feel how the water tilted, how something immense rolled over in sleep, and the ocean never quite settled again. Asterisk, the water received the little coil with the politeness of velvet, swallowing a pearl. Down it drifted, tail wrapped twice around its own body for comfort, until the cold grew so slow that even thoughts had to don knitted hats. There, the hatchling discovered a cradle carved of silt and whale bones, rocking itself on a current gentle enough to make glaciers drowsy. Whisper after whisper settled over the cradle minnows rehearsing gossip, old ship timbers rehearsing creaks, and the serpent listened, growing longer with every idle sigh, like yarn unraveled by invisible cats. Some scholars insist the beast's first meal was nothing grander than plankton. Others swear it nibbled rogue fragments of sunset that had fallen through cracks in the sea. Either way, growth arrived in patient inches that soon felt suspiciously like miles. Asterisk, by the time bubbles from Loki's original splash finally reached the surface, the serpent had uncurled once, twice, and then again, each stretch setting anew. Record for aquatic yawning. With every loop it measured, it learned. Worn vents told time with lazy plumes of steam. Migrating cod taught it arithmetic by swimming in tidy rows of 5. Even barnacles tutored it in the fine art of staying put when absolutely nothing needed doing. At a certain point, nobody can say whether it was a Tuesday or simply a moon. The serpent discovered that the quickest way to end its wandering thoughts was to circle the world entirely and nibble politely on its own tail. The maneuver felt curiously like closing a book in the middle of a sentence, so the story would never be forced to finish. Midgard, cradled now by a living belt of scales, sighed in relief and promptly forgot to worry about continental drift. The serpent, too, enjoyed the arrangement. Stability without standing still, movement without going anywhere. It was the arboric equivalent of spinning gently on an office chair while pretending to read emails from high. Cliff's Vikings occasionally spotted a faint rolling line far beyond the breakers and assumed it was just another horizon. Mariners who sailed farther could, if they squinted at midnight, make out a shimmer that moved against the tide like velvet being smoothed by a giant hand. They called it Jörmungandr, though they seldom wrote the name down for fear the ink would slither off the page. Fishermen told quieter tales, hooks drawn up bent into heart shapes, lines frayed by scales tougher than cautionary proverbs, entire shoals of herring bowing in perfect silence before turning tail. Yet for all the rumors, the serpent remained, a guardian more than a tyrant. Seabirds nested on waves it barely stirred, Plankton bloomed in the shadow of its coils like confetti at a parade nobody bothered to schedule. Thor, of course, had opinions, but thunder is essentially weather with a grudge, and most creatures learn to ignore it the way modern commuters ignore malfunctioning car alarms. Deep below, where daylight arrives only as rumor, the Serpent hosted conversations with creatures that measure time in centuries of drifting. One elderly squid recounted how continental shelves like to gossip about earthquakes, while a passing anglerfish bragged it had once photobombed a school of philosophers. The Serpent listened, looping its body into gentle figure eights so as not to wake tectonic plates. Sometimes it hummed, an almost sound that vibrated bones of forgotten shipwrecks into accidental percussion. On rare evenings, currents carried scraps of mortal prophecy down to the abyss, soft things about Ragnar penciled in hurried runes. The Serpent tasted each scrap carefully, the way a librarian tastes new ink with a fingertip. Most fragments spoke of final battles, but the beast found such endings odd, like insisting lullabies should conclude with applause. It tucked the prophecies under imaginary fins where they could nap indefinitely. Storms came and went, scrubbing the seas. Sealing with froth, the Serpent barely blinked. Circles, after all, have no corners for anxiety to hide in. One afternoon, a harpoon launched by an optimistic sailor sank through leagues of water, slowed, and settled gently between two overlapping scales. The weapon felt embarrassed and politely excused itself by rusting into a delicate orange lace. The Serpent wore for a century before shedding. Even Thor's famous fishing trip hook baited with an ox head, line strong enough to reel in second thoughts, ended not with captured terror but with a stalemate that both participants treated like a practice yawn. Some say the splash from Thor's retreating feet still echoes, but if it does, it has long since been catalogued as background ambience by passing dolphins. Night after night, tides breathed in synchrony with the Serpent's slow pulse so minimal it could be mistaken for a pause. Moonlight skimmed the surface, sprinkling silver confetti the Serpent never bothered to collect. Midgard slept unaware of its enormous rocking cradle, the way a child sleeps unaware of the parent swaying beside. The crib. Seasons rehearsed their wardrobe changes. Spring tossed blossom petals onto waves. Autumn skimmed leaves that fluttered down like sunburnt feathers. Winter stitched delicate ice at the edges, only to watch it melt again under summer's half-smile. Through it all, the Serpent remained exactly as coiled as needed. Never more, never less. Measuring eternity in comfortable increments of one self-embrace at a time. Should you still be listening, feel the water grow thicker, darker, slower. Picture plankton drifting like lost glitter, each speck carrying a weary wish. Imagine continents balanced on a flexing ring of scale that, surprisingly, does not squeak. Here a bubble, then another, counting themselves upward until numbers seem too energetic and switch to humming instead. Somewhere above, waves remember they forgot to crash and settle for sighing. And in this hush the Serpent dozes, tail gently resting between its jaws, as though cradling a pacifier fashioned from its own patience. Dreams, if serpents dream, roll across inner eyelids shaped like distant coastlines, each dream folding into itself until it looks suspiciously like another loop of world-hugging calm. Let your own thoughts follow that spiral, smaller, slower, softer, until they too find the comfortable blank space where beginnings meet endings and decide both can wait. Until morning. You're not drifting into legend is already wrapped around you. Somewhere just beneath the edge of thought, a shape coils with the patience of oceans, forming a circle so wide it brushes every shore. It doesn't shimmer. It doesn't roar. It waits. Not for drama, but for stillness, balance, breath. If the silence in your room has weight, that's just the sea holding its inhale. Let it. Let the calm reach your spine like the tide brushing harbors too sleepy to notice. And if these circular myths help your mind soften its grip, feel free to subscribe or leave your time and place in the comments. Maybe the serpent's listening more closely than you think. Asterisk down where sunlight fades into rumor, Jörmungandr finished. Its patient stretching exercise looped a final coil around the rim of the known world, and after a quick nibble to confirm its own tail tasted reassuringly familiar, settled into the most comfortable circular nap in cosmic history. The moment the circle closed, tide sighed like blankets finally arranged, and distant seamounts stopped arguing over who counted as tallest. The sea, now bordered by a single slow pulse, discovered it could hum in tune with itself without losing. The beat, the serpent's eyelids, if serpents truly bother with such accessories, drifted to half-mast. Yet every scale along its back kept half an ear on Midgard's shoreline gossip. Gull cries bounced off sleek curves, sounded twice before wandering off in confusion. Longships traced polite arcs that imitated the serpent's geometry, though their crews claimed credit for the idea. Fishermen noticed something else. The water, just beyond sight, looked calm in an oddly intentional way, as though supervised by a gargantuan lifeguard unwilling to blow a whistle. They called it the Watchful Deep, where storms arrived late and left early, as if embarrassed to disturb whoever held the horizon so still. Meanwhile, down below, Jörmungandr practiced the ancient art of doing absolutely nothing, perfecting the technique until even passing plankton slowed to take notes. Occasionally, the serpent felt an exploratory tug, perhaps, a drifting mat or a heroic hook with big ambitions, and responded with a gentle shift, just enough to suggest reconsideration. Nets returned empty but mysteriously untorn. Hooks came, back bent into speculative question marks, and legends sprouted like seaweed in their wake. Thor, ever a fan of high-volume solutions, once cast his famous line to test the rumors. What he reeled in was not monster or victory, but a brief eye-to-eye. Moment so quiet it drowned the thunder right out of him. The serpent blinked once, an action that took nearly a full breath of the ocean, and Thor, hearing nothing but his own heart booming in the hollows of his skull, decided perhaps next time he'd bring snacks instead of ox heads. Thus the circle remained intact, guardian and inquisitor returning to their respective hobbies, the serpent to stillness, Thor to storytelling about almost battles louder than any battle could be. Far beneath keel and crest, fish invented new ways to be impressed. Herring practiced synchronized shimmering whenever a scale glinted overhead. Cod adopted an unspoken rule that no individual should cross the invisible barrier of the serpents. Body without a very good reason, such as forgetting the rule. One plucky salmon tried leaping over a particular low-lying coil, landed with a splash that echoed like a small drumroll, and promptly forgot why it had bothered. Even sharks, those floating frowns of the sea, lowered their dorsal fins a polite centimeter when cruising parallel to the guardian's flank. The only creature unmoved was a single ancient clam who, having missed the part where the ocean received its living border, continued filtering silt with glacial indifference. Wisdom, apparently, arrives in many tempos. Night folded across the water, ironing moonlight into wide strips that draped over the serpent's back. Each strip lingered, trying out different shades of silver until settling on one that matched. Gahush, Jörmungandr exhaled, a ripple so subtle it registered only as a momentary hesitation in wave height charts that nobody would invent for another millennium. Above, cliffs absorbed the lull, converting it into myths that bards would later dilute with drama. Down here, however, nothing hurried to crescendo. Even prophecies visiting from distant whirlpools bowed politely at the coil, promising to save world-ending speeches for some other tide. The serpent, amused, tucked these promises beneath its expansive memory, where they nested among trivia about barnacle etiquette and the comparative taste of Pacific versus Atlantic krill. If your eyelids feel heavier now, you're merely sinking. With the Watchful Deep's preferred speed limit, picture a heartbeat stretched until each thump drifts far enough from the next to hold quiet conversations with itself. Imagine continents reclining against a scaly cushion that never judges their weight or their tectonic ambitions. Somewhere overhead, a gull gives up mid-caw, deciding the silence has better acoustics than any solo. A single bubble drifts up from the serpent's nostril, should serpents possess such things, wanders left. Right, then pops with the tiniest sigh, as if concluding there is simply too much room down here for urgency. Morning, when it finally remembers to arrive, tiptoes across the serpent's spine, tracing dew into miniature prisms that slide off and dissolve before reaching any news-minded scholar. Jörmungandr shifts one increment, tightening or loosening, by a length perhaps equal to a leisurely fjord, just enough to remind gravity who's hosting. Midgard responds with a microscopic wobble that most creatures file under perfectly normal. Somewhere in a fjord, a fisherman notices his boat rotate half a degree without wind, shrugs, and blames coffee that was brewed a shade too strong. Meanwhile, the serpent settles again, content that the cradle remains level and the planet hasn't rolled out during the night. And so the circle continues, ocean breathing within ocean, scales glimmering like mosaics too vast to finish, prophecies nestling into back pockets of currents until they feel more like bedtime rumors than threats. Should your thoughts happen to wander toward endings, simply remember the serpent nibbling its tail. Not from hunger, but from curiosity about how stories taste when they never quite close their loops. Let your own narrative curve gently until beginning kisses end and everything in between dissolves into a sigh shaped exactly like sleep. Sometimes the deepest silences begin with the most distant echoes. In the darkness far beneath the waves, even noise whispers with courtesy. Down here, the ocean rises like a chest, exhales, retreats, but never hurries. Every vibration in the water feels like intention, to exist without demanding attention. Where light cannot reach, even time moves like a sigh. And there, a stir begins, not a warning, not a threat, just a pulse that insists on being acknowledged. If your mind is still lingering on the surface, let it try sinking for a while. Perhaps the most peaceful echo is the one never spoken at all, far below wave gossip and whale arias. Jörmungandr senses the trembling grumble arrive like a polite knock on a very large door. The serpent does not flinch. Instead, it loosens its coil a fraction, barely a syllable of motion, so the vibration can stroll along its scales and calm itself. The resulting hum slides across basalt ridges, convincing nearby sponges to pause. Their filter work, and persuading a curious squid to shelve its questions for another century. Some say the thunder comes from storms stamping overhead. Others whisper Thor is stretching his shoulders underwater, just to hear what lightning sounds like when the world's softest mattress muffles it. Either way, each ripple of bass settles into the serpent's vast backbone until noise becomes pulse. Pulse becomes lull, and the abyss discovers a new key on its silent piano dot in the dim blue hush that follows. Armies of bioluminescent plankton rally into slow-motion constellations, arranging themselves around the serpent's body like campfire circles nobody remembers starting. Their tiny glows blink messages, some scientific, most gossip that drift upward only to fade before reaching ears inclined to care. Yet here in the belly of stillness, a different kind of skirmish plays out. Water against rock, pressure against time, darkness against the faintest shimmer of possible dawn. Scholars later call it the Silent War, though no banners unfurl and no casualties complain. A lone copepod, feeling ambitious, charges 0.5 millimeter forward, bumps a drifting snail, and both decide the front lines are overrated. Even Jörmungandr's scales engage in the quiet standoff, each plate overlapping the next by exactly one extra breath, ensuring no ambitious grain of sand sneaks in to scratch the peace. If tension exists, it must fill out paperwork in triplicate and wait for the serpent's pulse to call its number. Faced with such bureaucracy of calm, most tension politely withdraws. Somewhere above this non-battlefield, a stray thread of moonlight dives through leagues of black, dragging with it a rumor about prophecies stamped on the back of sea foam. It never reaches the bottom intact. Pressure folds the rumor into a compact spiral and tucks it beneath a granite shelf. Yet the notion of fate lingers, absorbed by a colony of tube worms that immediately begin debating stanza length. Their murmurs drift toward the serpents, inner ear assuming it has such a luxury, and settle in an unused corner of memory beside trivia about spiral shells. A prophecy needs only the slightest acknowledgement to awaken, and Jörmungandr, half curious, permits one eye to open just enough to taste the possibility. The gaze illuminates a sliver of water with a glow like tarnished bronze. Plankton blink in mild applause before dozing again. In that reluctant light, the serpent reads the hint. One day, lightning will find its footing in these depths, and the circle that cradles the world will feel a tug, not unlike the pinch of a dream waking too soon. The serpent blinks once more. The glow dissolves. The Vorms return to free verse arguments about comma placement, unaware they have just mailed dread to the distant future via slow sea post out above. The muffled thunder reheats, rolling along trench walls in low crescendos that resemble ceremonial kettle drums filled with velvet. The serpent exhales through gills so wide each breath could host migrating flounder. That breath rises in thermal spirals, meets the rumble. Halfway, and the two cancel each other with the cordial efficiency of diplomats exchanging identical treaties. Somewhere in a sunken longship, iron nails quiver, then settle, choosing to rest a little more quietly. The silence afterward feels deeper than before, as though absence itself has been freshly polished. Even the thunder seems satisfied with its rehearsal, retreating up the water column to rejoin storms that prefer applause. In its wake, currents realign, smoothing stray eddies into ribbons that drape across the serpent's resting spine. To casual observers, and there are none, this looks like nothing at all, which is precisely the point. The grandest conflict ends exactly where it began, with nobody certain whether it truly happened or simply thought about happening a bit. Too loudly gradually, the abyss resumes its previous occupation of being nearly everything and almost nothing. Brittle stars tiptoe across silt, leaving dotted lines that future geologists may misread as handwriting. A lanternfish patrol drifts by, each member verifying that the serpent's scales retain their soft gleam. Satisfied, they blink approving Norse code the serpent does not bother translating. The hidden prophecy, meanwhile, curls tighter beneath its granite shelf, waiting for centuries to mature like a shy cheese in a cold cellar. If you feel your thoughts coiling toward dreams, follow the serpent's example. Bite gently on the tail of waking notions, form a circle so smooth no worry can find purchase, and let any distant thunder practice elsewhere. Wavelets of quiet will keep looping, plankton constellations will keep rearranging their sleepy lights, and the sea will go, unpretending that stillness is just another word for a very patient motion. Somewhere beneath layers of salt and time, the ocean exhales, not to make waves, but to remember stillness. No prophecy arrives loudly here, just a hush thick and slow, brushing against scale and stone like a memory returning in deep water. You don't need to follow it, only to feel it pass. Let your thoughts stretch as wide as the sea's yawn. Let the rhythm curl around you like warm current tracing a forgotten route. Not every beginning announces itself. Some just rise gently and wait. Asterisk, the stir begins so small, it could be mistaken for a yawn of plankton, but the serpent senses it, a faint rising tide that smells of thawed glaciers and rumors from spring. One scale twitches, no more movement than a cat's whisker in sleep, and the nearby water thickens with anticipation. Far above, coastal villagers swear the moon looks bigger tonight, unaware they are witnessing nothing more dramatic than a planet-long stretch. The serpent lets the wave glide along its body, measuring the change as patiently as a tailor teasing an extra inch into an old cloak, then settles again, converting awakening into an unusually introspective nap. That minor stretch travels outward, passing through trenches, over thermal vents, and under shoals of cod who decide suddenly to reschedule breakfast. Scholars centuries later will catalog the disturbance as Ragnar's ripple, but for now it feels no sharper than the memory of laughter in a closed room. An old anchor lying on the seafloor rocks a centimeter to the left, considers. A midlife career move, and rocks back again. A bored crab, mistaking the motion for opportunity, raises one claw like a student with half a question, then dozes when no one calls on it. The ripple climbs toward the surface where it becomes a gentle swell, rolling beneath longships whose crews blame the wobble on uneven cargo or perhaps the cook's experimental cabbage stew. Jörmungandr watches from below, amused that mortals can mistake a planetary exhale for dietary critique, then releases a second, even softer pulse purely for symmetry. By the time this one arrives topside, it disguises itself as the nicest wave toddlers have ever met, ideal for sandcastle moat maintenance. Deep again, the serpent's heartbeat slows until each thud could host a lull in conversation. Yet woven through that calm is a faint melody older than marrow, the lullaby that ends the world, though end here feels exaggerated, more like the last line of a song someone hums long after the meaning drifts away. The tune spools out along the serpent's ribs, so low that only boulders remember to vibrate. A passing school of lanternfish catches the rhythm and flashes in time, turning the abyss into a dim mirror ball. Even stone columns rooted in muck sway a fraction, the geological equivalent of tapping toes. The lullaby does not hurry. It coils through water as if trying on silence for size, occasionally borrowing syllables from whale calls and polishing them until they shine like pocket stones. In this hush, the serpent hums back, its voice a ribbon of bass so gentle it files smooth every sharp edge in the tune. Somewhere on shore, a dog perks its ears, puzzled that the sea seems to be breathing in 3/4 time, then curls up again because mysteries make better pillows than alerts dot above. Dawn drifts toward the horizon, brushing pale silver over crests that still carry the aftertaste of those soft ripples. Midgard rocks so slightly no compass records it, yet seedlings in clifftop soil seem to root a little deeper, as though grateful for the hug. Thor, waking in Asgard, stretches and wonders why his hammer feels a shade lighter, never suspecting a serpent's dreamy exhale has subtly massaged the weight of the world. Meanwhile, Jörmungandr completes its final coil, tail fitting into jaws, with the contentment of a bookmark returning to its page. The awakening tide subsides. The ripple dissolves into ordinary current. The lullaby tucks itself behind an eyelid of ocean darkness, saving the rest of its verses for a century less sleepy. Should your own thoughts still flutter, let them drift beside that retiring song, each note quieter than the one before, each breath of water smoother than the last, until they, too, find the comfortable moment where moving and resting become. The same slow curve, and morning, considerate as ever, agrees to wait outside until you're ready. You might not expect snowfall to keep an attendance sheet, yet in the far northern lodge where HR spends his quiet hours, each flake drifts past the window as though checking its name off a softly glowing ledger. If your eyelids manage to hover open for another minute, feel free to tap that discreet rune labeled "Subscribe," though. Should drowsiness fold you under sooner, the flakes will confirm your presence on the evening's roster without hesitation. Inside the lodge, HR rests in a cedar chair polished by seasons of stillness. Blind to the lantern's glow beside him, He listens instead, the faint hiss of snow settling on shingles, the wool-deep rustle of a pine log shifting in the hearth, and somewhere beyond these walls, the distant sigh of glaciers adjusting their posture. In his lap lies a narrow box of carved ashwood. He lifts the lid, touching each of 12 tiny brass sleigh bells stored within. They chime so lightly the sound feels imagined, yet each note maps the hush in the room like stars pricking. Fresh holes in winter sky, the first bell cast to mimic the size of a hazelnut each char threads onto a strip of undyed wool. He aligns it toward the window, muttering that smallest notes belong nearest the future dawn. Scholars might call this arrangement poetic. He calls it practical. Outside, wind shifts a curtain of falling crystals sideways, trying on a new angle of descent. The bell answers with a single tremor, registering the change the way a sleep tracker logs a stir. Acher nods, satisfied, and sets the strip across one arm of the chair so it can memorize the cadence of drifting quiet. From the hearth a spark cracks, landing on stone, then fizzles into a curl of steam reminiscent of punctuation, revising itself mid-sentence. Somewhere under the floorboards, a hibernating vole turns over, perhaps dreaming of summer dirt. The room absorbs these micro-events, layering them into what sounds to less patient ears, like perfect silence. Next he lifts a pair of slightly larger bells, walnut-sized, their brass gone mellow with age. He fingers their rims, finding the faint groove time leaves on metal, and threads them onto a second strip. These middle bells, he murmurs, are for cataloging the heartbeats of snowdrifts. He positions the strip on the back of the chair so the bells face the hearth. Warmth will nudge them at its own pace, measuring thaw by tremor. Acher tilts his head, hearing the subtle tick of expanding resin within the burning pine. The bells remain still, approving the log's restraint. He scribbles, a note stylus scratching birch bark paper, recording the hearth's cooperative tempo. His handwriting wanders, wide-looped and unhurried, like footprints made by someone who has nowhere distant to reach. Outside, night thickens into something plush. Scene shifts, and the third set of bells, almond-shaped and holding a deeper timbre find. Their turn. He threads them onto a ribbon of pale gray, then hangs the loop on a hook above the window latch, an altitude reserved for cataloging wind and tension. A breeze nudges the latch, and the bells rumble a note that lands somewhere between. A sigh and a yawn. Acher interprets the tone as north-northeast, unhurried, and writes it down, adding a small star in the margin to denote pleasant indifference. A lone snowflake, larger than its peers, nudges the glass and melts into a teardrop that slides downward, tracing a silver path. The bells do not react. One flake is statistically insignificant, and Mayer, scientist of slumber lantern light, dims a fraction as the wick settles into lower flame, signaling the third, deeper hush of the night. Acher reaches for the final bell, only one-sized, like a plum pit yet cast from bronze, darkened almost black. He ties it to a narrow leather cord and slips it around his wrist. This bell is for dream tracking. It should move only when his breathing shifts beyond the boundaries of waking. He leans back, letting the chair cradle him, and places both hands on the arm's palms open, bell quiet. Beyond the wall, the wind rallies, sweeping loose snow into swirls that imitate choreography learned from rivers. The window creaks once. Gently, inside, the middle bells respond with a faint clutter, but the wrist bell remains still. Proving consciousness lingers, though just barely in this pause, Acher allows mind to wander. He recounts, without voice, the shapes falling snow can take. The friendly fractal, the hexagonal plate, the seldom-seen hollow column. Each variety, he believes, arrives with a slightly different timbre. If only bells could ring those shapes. He imagines adding 6 more strands, one per crystal pattern, but flags the thought for some future winter when patience demands fresh hobbies. The hearth pops again. A second spark lands, fizzles, fades. The upper bowels murmur agreement. Wind remains north-northeast, still unhurried. HR smiles toward the sound, as if facing it, and the wrist bell trembles half a beat before settling. He notes that too, breathing aligned with spark. He writes, then dots the I with a tiny circle like a snow lion paw print. The final scene drifts in unslippered. Steps, darkness thick enough now to mute even pine aromatics. HR stands. To draw the curtains, his movement guiding a mild chorus from every strand of bells. Tiny notes overlapping into a hush so gentle it could be mistaken for thought. Curtains closed, the room shrinks to lantern radius. He returns to the chair, lowers himself, and listens for summarizing quiet. The bells comply, first the little hazelnut chimes, then the walnuts, then the almonds, each fading into the next like thoughts stepping slowly away. The wrist bell, however, stays silent, sensing the approach of its moment. HR inhales, slow enough to count 5 impossible colors inside eyelids. Exhales, slow enough to trace one full loop around imagined Midgard. The bell swings once, a note too soft to measure, then stops. In the margin, he scrawls, almost illegibly now, silence adopted, and guides stylus back into its wooden sleeve. Lantern glow settles into amber ember, and the room folds over itself the way snow folds over ground layer after patient layer. If your breathing has found the lodge's rhythm, you may hear bells only as the faint echo of pulse, each note cataloging stray gusts somewhere outside dream perimeter. The window no longer admits moonlight. Instead, it holds darkness like a mirror refusing to reveal reflection. Bells rest, ledger sleeps, and Hutchar drifts into that unlit place where even quiet becomes an unnecessary luxury. Should any thought attempt to stir you, imagine threading it onto a ribbon alongside brass, or bronze, letting it swing once, twice, then settle into the grand registry of snow that arrives precisely on time, yet never seems to finish falling. You might be surprised to learn that a single herring can draft an entire chapter of anxiety just by noticing a slightly darker line in the water. Yet tonight, one such silver dart pauses mid-shoal and decides the curve ahead looks suspiciously like a scale the size of narrative ambition. If you're still blinking, feel free to nudge that discreet rune, meaning whisper me more later. Though if lids begin to surrender, the herring will happily file your early departure under sensible survival instincts. The shoal around, it hesitates. Thousands of tiny tails flick once, twice, then hold still, as though the ocean has politely asked everyone to stop breathing for a moment. Below them, Jörmungandr rests where horizon meets hush, its vast body coiled so gently that even turbulence steps around. The herring listens to its own pulse, a metronome made of bubbles, and imagines distant ancestors telling campfire tales about exactly this silence. It drifts forward an inch bravery measured in plague lengths, then back again, inventing fear. In lowercase, so it doesn't feel theatrical. Meanwhile, the serpent does nothing at all, which is somehow more impressive than lightning. Current slides over the shoal, curling like a librarian's finger, summoning them deeper into the stacks. Every fish follows, unwilling to appear dramatic by objecting first. Collective courage disguises individual doubt the way shadows blend strangers at dusk. As they glide, bioluminescent plankton flare underbellies, tracing soft constellations that look to passing krill like bedtime planets. The herring up front notes that the darker line hasn't moved. Perhaps it is only a trick of moonlight filtered through leaks of salt. It tests the theory by nibbling a morsel of drifting plankton. As if chewing can disprove dread, a tiny bubble escapes its gill panic reduced to punctuation and rises toward surface dim. Far below, one scale on the serpent's flank flexes, reflecting a muted flash. The effect is no louder than a wink, yet the shoal processes it as a Gentle memorandum, guardian present, panic optional. Some fish accept at once, others store the memo for later overthinking. But all continue swimming, each tail beat now half a sigh slower. The serpent, if it could chuckle without making tectonic. Plates reconsider their positions, might find this ballet charming. Instead, it listens through miles of stillness, cataloging each heartbeat as if counting grains of sand in leisurely reverse. Water presses against its coils, offering reports. Cod murmuring about unexpected stillness. Shrimp debating whether fear tastes better fried. A single haddock consulting maps drawn inside its skull but upside down. Jörmungandr files these updates alongside centuries of similar rumors, then exhales just enough to nudge a gentle eddy upward. The eddy rises, like a silk ribbon, satisfies curiosity by stroking the underside of the shoal, and departs without leaving fingerprints. Most fish interpret the touch as a kind pat on the shoulder from physics itself. A few, crafting bolder metaphors, describe it as the sea's version of closing a bedside novel so the protagonist can sleep. Fear thins, stretches, becomes something. Closer to ordinary vigilance useful, but not theatrical. Somewhere off to the side, a lanternfish observes the transformation and decides to file a field report via brief pulses of light. Serpent calm, it blinks, shoal recalibrating. The message scatters across darkness like dropped coins. Crabs scuttle across sand to collect gossip. Starfish merely shrug, too patient for rumor. In the shoal, the first heron finally feels foolish enough to laugh if fish could laugh, and the soundless chuckle translates into a zigzag of dorsal shimmer, cueing others to relax by imitation. They resume feeding, each mouthful accompanied by what can only be called an underwater sigh. Jörmungandr registers the return of tiny crunching noises and decides, in an unhurried thought, that Midgard's fear response remains delightfully self-correcting. It flicks the absolute tip of its tail in action subtle as a comma redirecting a far-off current, so a drifting patch of plankton ambles near the shoal. Free snacks are sometimes the most efficient sedative dot above, the moon. Forgets itself behind a cloud. Darkness deepens, but feels less like a threat, and more like a weighted blanket. The shoal, now full of cautious contentment, shifts into a slow carousel pattern, as though auditioning for a screensaver in a very relaxed universe. Bubbles rise in unhurried columns. Sediment settles. Even the haddock stops reading upside down. Maps and decides existential orientation can wait till morning. The serpent draws one final breath long enough to circumnavigate a legend, short enough not to disturb anyone already drifting, and lets its coil tighten by the width of a single whisper. Planet and pulse align, water and quiet fuse. Fear, finding no purchase, dissolves into the same soft hush that knits waves to stars. Should your thoughts be lingering with the fish, imagine them nibbling those bonus plankton, each bite releasing a note of calm so small it only registers as heaviness in your eyelids. Let the current spin you once, perhaps twice, then settle back into the cradle the serpent keeps just beneath all storms, where even worry feels obliged to sleep in lowercase. You might not think thunder could hold its breath long enough to visit the ocean floor, yet tonight a single growl slips beneath storm cloud curtains, descends through miles of hushed blue, and arrives at the serpent's coils like a forgotten drumroll searching for context. If you remain conscious long enough to nudge that discreet little rune, promising more bedtime myths, feel free, though if the rumble lulls you under first, even Thor will forgive the skip subscription. The sound reaches Jörmungandr as a soft vibration, no sharper than a lullaby sung into mittened hands. A single scale responds, lifting half a heartbeat before settling again, and the echo twirls away down trenches lined with slow-blinking anemones. Somewhere above, lightning sketches hurried runes across cloud bellies, but down here the script unfurls in lowercase, each letter a ripple folding into silt, too patient for punctuation. The serpent lets the tremor wander its length, collecting sea dust like chalk on an unread blackboard. Fish pause mid-fin, listening with the wide-eyed optimism of organisms that assume every noise might be dinner. They hear nothing but soft, receding bass, and beside the menu remains plankton. Farther out, a rubble field of sunken boulders rearranges its alignment by a fraction no instrument yet invented could track. Barnacles loosen their grip, reconsider, then tighten again, officially. Recording the event as mildly interesting. The thunder finds no resonance large enough to echo back, so it curls on itself like a tired cat and drifts toward warmer vents where it can nap as geothermal steam. The serpent feels the weight of silence return, heavier by a single heartbeat, and exhales a ribbon of bubbles that rise in orderly pairs, as if counting the spaces between non-existent beats. Above this calm, the storm continues its noisy monologue, rain hissing where waves greet sky, but depth converts each shout into a wordless hum. Mid-column, traveling whales listen. Some incorporate the note into their songs, lowering a chorus half an octave. Others dismiss it as atmospheric gossip. One calf flicks its tail, delighted at the accidental bass drop, and the vibration rises again smaller, rounder until it kisses the serpent's dorsal ridge like a pebble tossed onto velvet. Jörmungandr flinches this time, but only minimally, enough to shake a plume of bioluminescent algae free from an overgrown scale. The glowing flecks swirl upward, forming a lazy spiral staircase nobody climbs. A lanternfish bobs through the helix, blinking astonishment to anyone willing to read its Morse flashes. World base just wiggled, carry on. Plankton ignore the memo, too busy rehearsing drift maneuvers. Minutes or maybe centuries, time feels. Negotiable here slide past, and thunder prepares a second visit. This one enters the water as if wearing house slippers, gentler, broader, less concerned with volume. It spreads across the serpent's coils, diffuses into the seabed, and brushes. Up against a buried longship whose timbers have grown accustomed to the lull. Inside that wreck, a cargo of iron nails vibrates in loose harmony, each nail offering a soft metallic ping that no living ear detects. The ping travels through hull ribs, escapes via sprung plank, and tickles the underbelly of a skate lying flat on sand. The skate, convinced a relative has tapped hello, flops once, stirring dust in symmetrical swirls that rise like incense. The serpent enjoys this accidental choreography, feeling grains of silt settle on its scales like gentle applause. A final growl slips down the water column, but exhaustion has blunted its edges. By the time it reaches Jörmungandr, the sound is little more than a sigh wearing out its shoes. The serpent absorbs it without comment, then releases a counterpulse, just strong enough to meet the dying vibration halfway. The two waves cancel with a hush so complete even molecules seem to hold pause. Fish resume finning. The skate reburies itself. Barnacles mark another box on their spreadsheet of resonances. Above, the storm flares one brave bolt white on black, then moves east, chasing fresh coastlines to lecture. Darkness behind it clears just enough for moonlight to pierce and dabble the surface, sending faint silver threads downward. Those threads never reach the serpent, but plankton catch them, scattering glints like slow fireworks, enclosing the shoals and temporary constellations. Somewhere in that shimmer, our initial herring sighs with relief and tells its nearest neighbor the world remains large, but not predatory tonight. If your breathing has merged with the sea's reduced tempo, notice how each inhale resembles tide. Drawing foam, each exhale its gentle return. Imagine thunder drifting still deeper, diffusing into warmth, becoming nothing more alarming than a distant bass note you almost recall, then forget. Let scales the size of prairies settle over your worries until even lightning cannot pry them loose. Tomorrow the serpent may twitch again, storms may rehearse crescendo, but now everything is curling into quiet circles, humming beneath thresholds set by sleep. Should any stray rumble echo in memory, let it roll along spine and ribcage. The way it rolled across ocean floor, leaving only a mild tremor, a rearranged grain of sand, and the kind of soft dark that invites even storm clouds to rest their voices. You might not imagine an entire battlefield made of hush, yet somewhere beneath the loud red heart of Midgard, a conflict unfolds, so quietly that even gossip must whisper or risk being mistaken for strategy. If you're still alert a moment from now, you're welcome to tap that subtle rune that gently promises more nocturnal nonsense. If you slip away before then, consider it your first victory in this war of yawns. Down where daylight fizzles into rumor, Jörmungandr senses the tension. The way moss senses footfalls above, not through noise, but through the sudden absence of it. Two rival currents, one coaxed by warm equatorial dreams, the other marching from polar stillness, meet along the serpent's backbone. They do not crash, they negotiate. Warmth offers a languid swirl, cold counters with a crisp pause, and both wait to see who will admit weariness first. The serpent, amused, uncoils an inch just to give them room, the gesture about as radical as moving a bookmark to the next paragraph. For a long while, nothing happens. That is to say, everything vital happens at the speed of geological gossip. Sand grains reorder themselves into faint dunes like troops too shy to form lines. A squad of shrimp drifts between the two masses, each tiny armor plate flashing blue, then red, as if unable to pick a uniform. They tap one another with antennae, debating whether tension counts as seasoning, and ultimately decide to file the question under savory mystery. Nearby, a colony of tube worms extends and retracts like spectators, stretching for a better view, though they will later claim they noticed nothing at all. Above the so-called front line, lightless fathoms vibrate at a pitch just lower than awareness. It is the sound of two intentions sharing one corridor, neither wanting dominion, both resisting retreat. Minutes pass in slippered feet, growing into hours. Worm current edges forward, wrapping around a slow-turning spiral of plankton, promising comfort. Cold responds by exhaling calm so deep, it makes narwhal hearts slow another beat. Jörmungandr tilts a scale, measuring which persuasion feels heavier. Warmth carries whispers of distant reefs, riotous with color. Cold brings tailies of black ice shining like obsidian lullabies. Neither side raises a voice. This is silent war, after all an argument fought entirely in lowered eyelids and adjustments. Almost too delicate to chart, the serpent blinks once, a wink that lasts the length of a sea shanty sung half a world away, and decides neutrality tastes like solitude steeped to perfection. Occasionally a wandering whale glides overhead, sensing the muted standoff below. Like a library door left ajar, she hums a question, need a referee. No answer rises. The currents simply fold her echo into their negotiations, and she departs, satisfied that peace, while puzzling, remains intact. Farther off, a brittle star attempts a revolt, waving spindled arms in all directions, but finds no audience and quietly retires its revolution. More sand shifts, drafting fresh topography nobody signs. Warmth tries a flaunting swirl that grazes one of Jörmungandr's overlapping plates. Cold responds by settling deeper into the serpent's shadow, wearing darkness like extra armor. The scale, now touched by both, gleams with a neutral sheen, as though indifferent to propaganda. Half an ocean away, a fleet of cod gives a collective shiver they can't explain. They resume swimming, chalking the tremor up to mid-season restlessness. Back at the front, if one can call a gently curving isotherm a front warmth softens, conceding a hair's breadth to the polar advance. Cold, not wishing to appear boastful, yields equal measure. The serpent registers the simultaneous retreat as mutual courtesy rather than subterfuge. It exhales a line of bubbles, which ascend like punctuation in a sentence rich with commas, and rolls one vertebra against another, producing a sub-audible click that settles across both currents. The click translates loosely as good sportsmanship, and the currents, flattered, drift into a détente where boundaries blur into cozy gradients. With no loser to console and no victor to crown, silence swells triumphant, blanketing the trench in velvet thick enough to muffle even tectonic sighs. Shrimp twirl briefly, celebrating the uneventful outcome with all the enthusiasm of confetti in slow motion. Tube forms retract in orderly unison, a non-parade dispersing before anyone can ask directions. Down drifts a single scale shed by the serpent, a souvenir of the seas never happened, and it lands atop a sand dune, glinting like a metal designed by introverts. Silt settles over it within minutes, eager to keep secrets spark-free. Jörmungandr seals its coil tighter by something less than a human heartbeat, satisfied that the world's cradle rocks in perfect monotone once again. If your breathing has sensed with this submarine hush, notice how each inhale feels like warm current promising comfort, each exhale like cool water insisting on calm, and both coexist without ripple. Should stray thoughts attempt to invade like rowdy storms, searching for thunder, let them find no purchase on these silent trenches. Offer them a seat beside plankton constellations and watch them drift, too fascinated by nothingness to raise. Debate. Eventually, even imagination grows respectful, curling into its own quiet eddies. Somewhere above, storms will resume their clamor, and sunshine will write bright signatures across waves. Down here, however, the war has ended exactly as it began, a polite disagreement erased by shared drowsiness. Hold that truce in the soft curve of your ribs, let warm and cool merge into the equal hush of sleep, and drift with the serpent's ancient patience until dawn remembers your name. You might not think dawn could yawn underwater, yet on this particular morning a pale glaze of light slips beneath the waves and stretches so lazily across Jörmungandr's scales that even plankton pause mid-drift to watch the color crawl. If your eyelids can hover a heartbeat longer, you're welcome to tap that quiet rune for future tailies. If not, the sea will file your early surrender under appropriate enthusiasm. The first glimmer kisses the serpent's spine, and every scale shivers in sequence, a ripple so smooth it feels like velvet deciding to breathe. One overlapping plate lifts just the breadth of a seashell, then settles again, and the water above it rearranges, discovering a new shade of silver. Shoals nearby register the motion in hushed murmurs. Herring tilt, cod blink, and a bold. Squid sketches 3 tentative question, marks in ink before deciding uncertainty is overrated at this depth. The motion spreads, not as a wave, but as a suggestion. Currents once content to meander now nudge forward as if handed a subtle itinerary. Warm strands from sunlit shallows mingle with colder rivulets rising from trenches, and the blend feels like morning coffee poured into yesterday's tea, oddly comforting, faintly adventurous. The spiral of mingled waters lifts plankton constellations higher, where light will someday turn them into specks of mild glitter. Jörmungandr, half drowsing, uncoils by the thickness of one sigh, enough to let Midgard shift fractionally within. Its cradle. Somewhere atop a distant cliff, a lonely weather vane swivels without wind, chalking the twitch up to eccentric breezes. Below, the serpent's heartbeat thuds once, cautious as a soft knock on an unfamiliar door, and the ocean listens the way glass listens for distant thunder. A second shimmer descends, slightly brighter, carrying the faint taste of melted snow. Seeped through meadow roots, this light drapes over the serpent's midsection, where barnacles have sketched the year's quiet progress in chalky rings. One barnacle, awakened by glow, pops a feeble plume of feeding arms, realizes breakfast is still theoretical, and withdraws, leaving behind a ripple of comedic timing. The serpent curls its tail inward, smoothing the seafloor ridge and sending a slow-motion avalanche of silt toward a graveyard of amphorae half buried and wholly unconcerned. A lone amphora tips, spilling nothing but old echoes which roll across. Sand like marbles, hunting pockets. Tiny crabs chase these soundless spheres, each convinced treasure clinks just out of reach, and then forget why they started. The way you forget sentences halfway through a dream dot above the stir. Dolphins arc through dim water, their clicks slipping down to bounce against the serpent's flexible wall. They interpret the echoes as new corridors in an already generous. Maze and celebrate by tracing figure eights, sprinkling bubbles like confetti no one needs to sweep. Jörmungandr senses the patterns, interprets them as applause, and rewards the dolphins with a gentle heave that lifts them closer to the surface without making them late for anything. The dolphins burst through whitecaps, find daylight still, yawning at the horizon and dive again, satisfied they've previewed a sunrise ahead of schedule. Their tails flick droplets that fall back like reversed rain, an early hint that above and below are busy trading positions this hour. Farther down, the awakening tide gathers resolve. It is not a wave you could surf. It is a long, deliberate breath the ocean has been saving for an occasion that does not require fanfare. Pressure shifts so evenly that even fragile glass sponges remain uncracked, yet every creature feels an almost imperceptible lift, as though their personal gravity had been dialed down a single, friendly notch. Sand dollars tilt, reassessing. Level. A sullen shark coasting the thermocline suddenly believes in second chances and loops. One lazy barrel roll before resuming its gruff glide. The serpent expands once more another size width, and Midgard rides the movement like a child on a quiet swing, never noticing the arc but dreaming just a touch brighter. Now the third hush arrives, the one soaked in possibility thick as dew. Light has strengthened to pale jade, enough to outline ruined figureheads on drowned ships. These carved faces, startled awake after centuries of algae masks, glare at their new reflection in serpent-polished sand and decide vanity should sleep in. The shard of hidden prophecy, buried earlier beneath fine dust, pulses faintly in sympathy with the rising glow, but runes stay mute, perhaps deciding repetition spoils suspense. Jörmungandr feels the pulse, acknowledges with an inner hum, and loosens its bite on its tail by a fraction smaller than arithmetic will notice. Water floods the gap, curiously testing the freedom, then flows out again when the serpent recloses the circle security system tested. No alarm necessary. Surface tension finally senses the subterranean rearrangement, and a subtle set of swells travels outward. Coastal coves translate the motion into a series of gentle licks against rock, as though the sea were tasting each cliff for morning readiness. Fishermen anchored offshore glance at their nets rocking. One swears he heard the water sigh, almost. In impeccable Old Norse, nothing spills from the swells. No goal loses its footing. Yet somewhere a tide clock ticks one breath ahead of schedule. The adjustment will perplex no one, because no one will notice, but it satisfies some cosmic ledger that enjoys balancing columns without paperwork. Back in the deep, the fourth and calmest scene unfurls. The hush after stretching, the pause. Before standing, Jörmungandr settles into its rebalanced cradle, scales lying flat, pulse returning to its usual glacial metronome. Warm and cold strands disentangle gracefully, each retreating to familiar lanes like courteous pedestrians. After a brief dance in a narrow alley, dolphins depart, barnacles resume dozing, and amphorae accept fresh dust. The hidden shard dims once more, promising future glow sessions at indeterminate dates. Above, the first true sunrise beam breaks past the horizon. It swims downward, thinning with depth, and reaches just far enough to graze a single plate on the serpent's crown. The plate flashes a wink of gold day confirmed, and darkness sighs itself neatly behind continental shelves. Should your thoughts still float, imagine they are sifted by that mild tide, each inhale drawing them upward. Toward dawn, each exhale letting them settle like harmless dust over sleeping ruins. Feel how even a world-hugging serpent stirs only by permission of quiet need, not drama. Let your own stirring shrink by comparable fractions until rest feels like the correct geometry. In this awakening tide, no alarm rings. Instead, tomorrow slips in through the smallest doorway, shakes hands with stillness, and agrees to whisper until you decide morning deserves your eyes. You might not expect a prophecy to hide beneath half an inch of silt, yet somewhere along the serpent's vast backbone, a single rune-etched shard slumbers, patient as moonlight waiting behind noon. If your eyes can linger past the first ripple of curiosity, feel free to tap the discreet rune promising future bedtime wanderings, though if drowsiness claims you early, the prophecy will jot a note in its margin that you attended in spirit. Downward daylight retires before starting. Jörmungandr senses the shard the way a harp string feels a fingertip 3 rooms away, not in sound, but in the hush that follows. One overlapping scale larger than a meadow, smoother than yesterday's dream shifts enough to coax a whisper of current across the relic. The motion unseals a puff of ancient dust, and the fragment gleams for the first time in centuries, as shy as a firefly in deep twilight. No trumpet blares, no choir intones. The future arrives in lowercase, wrapped in patient mud. The shard's surface carries 9 tiny runes, each finer than hair sliced lengthwise. Scholars of a louder age would assign them to doom and glory, but here they glow like mild suggestions in the dim green gloom. A passing chain of copepods pauses, antennae quivering at the novelty of text. Finding it unseasoned, they drift on. The prophecy waits for a more considerate reader, perhaps the serpent itself. Jörmungandr exhales a stream of bubbles, spiraling up like punctuation marks testing fonts. When they clear, the serpent lowers an eyelid not fully open, just enough to cast a bronze wash of bioluminescent reflection across the shard. Runes spark to life, projecting meaning in ghost voices too soft to wake barnacles. They tell a story in which the circle that cradles the world someday chafes against its own perfection. Deciding endings make decent lullabies too. The serpent, hearing this, hums a note so low that only tectonic plates file it in their diaries. Then, almost politely, Jörmungandr blinks again, dimming the runes back to dormancy. Currents resume their usual errands. Scene drifts toward deeper hush as sediment begins the slow debate of whether to veil the shard again. A tiny crab, no larger than a punctuation dot, clambers atop the fragment and raises one claw, as if pledging to guard the secret. Moments later, it forgets why it climbed there, rotates twice, and decides the shard's warm luminescence feels vaguely comforting on its shell. Above, a squad of lanternfish glide past, flashing curious patterns that, if decoded, might read, "New nightlight. Detected filing under maybe." Jörmungandr listens, amused at the bureaucracy of fauna, and shifts ever so slightly enough to produce a micro-wake that rolls under the shard like a hand tucking in a blanket. Dust relaxes, settling into softer dunes. The Krabdoz's mission? Abandoned with no hard feelings. A third hush arrives, this one flavored faintly with fairy tales migrating in seawater. The shard accepts a thin coat of silt, its glow now muted to an ember that still beckons unscheduled dreams. The runes continue to hum within themselves, syllables rearranging like sleepers rotating pillows. They reach consensus on a single phrase. When thunder forgets its echo, the statement nests between grains of sand, content to wait until something bigger than time stops by to ask directions. Meanwhile, a lone sea cucumber inches past, trailing a faint path that resembles calligraphy, practiced by a half-awake monk. It bumps the shard, offers no apology, and continues, leaving behind a scribble that may or may not be taken for commentary in a million years. Above, the serpent tilts one ear-assuming serpents possess such geometry-catching distant echoes. Of storms miles overhead, thunder rumbles as though tightening its throat, but here it sounds like a sigh given up mid-sentence. The prophecy shard brightens a smudge, perhaps wondering whether forgetting an echo counts as fulfillment. Jörmungandr settles the question by flicking a tail fin the length of a fjord, producing a wave that meets the faint thunder halfway, erasing remaining evidence of sound. In response, the shard dims contentedly. Condition satisfied, yet no alarm. Raised, fate, it appears, enjoys soft launches. If your thoughts still hover, picture layers of silt drifting like snow that never lands loudly, each flake sealing prophecy under softer silence. Imagine runes breathing slowly, happy to wait out. Centuries alongside dozing crabs and undecided currents. Feel your own eyelids accrue a similar hush, sealing today's worries beneath fine dust until they, too, agree to glow only when politely asked. And should the shard ever shine brightly again centuries or seconds hence, know that it will announce nothing with more volume than this moment. A secret so gentle it doubles as a lull, looping quietly beneath the living ring that rocks the world to sleep. You might not expect the end of all things to begin as quietly as a single wavelet changing its mind. Yet somewhere in the mid-ocean hush, a ripple gathers, no louder than the thought of rain on a roof you have never seen. If you're still awake, after a breath or two, you could always press that unobtrusive rune that promises future drifts like this, though if you nod off first, the ripple will consider your silence an excellent review. It starts far away, where icebergs dream of their own parents and winds practice new pronunciations of the word north. A sliver of meltwater slides into a current, tilting salinity by a fraction small enough to hide in the margin of a snowflake, but large enough for tides to whisper, something has shifted. They pass the message along like gossip too polite for exclamation points, and by the time it reaches the coast of Midgard, the rumor is no more than a sigh curling inside the ear of a barnacle. Down below, Jörmungandr feels the tremor wrap around. One loop of its endless body, the serpent does not uncoil. It merely listens, the way a cat listens through closed eyes to a hand hovering inches from fur. The ripple slides along scales the size of valleys, pausing to read each ancient scratch. An algae doodle like a student checking the margins of a borrowed notebook. At one overlap, it discovers a tiny mural drawn by passing shrimp spirals. Dots, perhaps an accidental portrait of Thor's hammer, then continues, never hurried, never lost. Above, gulls rearrange flight plans without knowing why. They sense only that the breeze now carries a trace of stories it refused yesterday. A fisherman standing on the deck of a half-dozing longship feels the vessel rock an extra half-heartbeat, chalks it up to ballast, and adjusts a knot. Somewhere in a fjord, a lone pine leans a centimeter farther from cliff edge so slowly that only lichens record the motion. None of these mortals imagine the ripple will take its time gathering pace, the way ink takes its time coaxing a quill toward the end of a monotonous letter. Beneath the rolling hush, the serpent hums, a note pitched to the patient ears of basalt. The hum travels downward, nudging magma pockets that answer with low, contented gurgles. Even molten stone appreciates acknowledgement. A colony of luminous jellyfish witlessly intercepts the sound, interpreting it as an invitation to perform. They drift upward, looping their tentacles into cursive that glows sapphire and wanes to pale jade, spelling sentences nobody above can parse, but everyone below finds reassuring. The ripple, amused, threads through the jelly ballet without ruffling a tentacle, careful not to spoil choreography. Further along, it passes a granite ridge where a prophecy shard once rested, now buried again, and traces its edge like a finger. Following unread braille, the runes inside remain dormant. Perhaps they understand this is rehearsal, not finale. Mid-column. Whales cruising their usual migration routes catch the ripple in rib-deep sonar. One matriarch lowers her song a full semitone, testing how far calm can bend toward gravity before snapping. The note wraps around her pod like knitted kelp, and calves settle into its pockets, each heartbeat joining the unwritten chord. Jörmungandr hears this amendment to the ocean's choir and answers with another hum, slightly sharper, the musical equivalent of acknowledging a compliment with a raised cup. The effect cancels nothing. It merely harmonizes, folding time onto itself so future tension can nap between layers. Somewhere overhead thunder coughs in a distant cloud bank, but the sound reaches the water only as a memory of authority, quickly. Dispersed by foam, the ripple reaches continental slope, slows, and changes outfit, trading salt for silt. Particles of mud rise in slow columns, each speck carrying a story older than barns and younger than eternity. They drift across the Serpent's coils and settle in grooves shaped like sleeping rivers, shading scales in earthier bronze. In a sunken grove of kelp, fronds detect the faint swell and lean together, whispering that the sea seems fractionally taller today, perhaps having tried on new shoes. A torpid shark passing through the grove notes the angle of stems, shrugs a fin, and decides breakfast can wait until geometry steadies. Atop the slope, sediment falls into deep water canyons, sending a soft hiss upward that sounds suspiciously like parchment turning. Anyone listening keenly would hear nothing but this line. Soon, but not quite yet. Above, dawn tips a second ladle of light into the sea and watches the brew bloom slowly downward. The brightness reaches a shoal of sardines. Each fish receives a fraction of a photon, enough to polish one scale. In return, they pivot, forming a quicksilver helix that subtly echoes the serpent's larger loop below. For a brief moment, too, spirals, one colossal, one compact, coexist in soft mimicry, like parent and child sharing a quiet inside joke. The ripple, nearing the serpent's curved tail, feels the reflection of its own motion in the smaller dance and pauses to watch, stretching time so the sardines can finish their figure without clashing into tomorrow. Finished, the shoal dissolves. Back into loose gleam, the ripple resumes, satisfied that symmetry enjoys its work. Finally, it arrives at the serpent's tail, where Jörmungandr's jaw rests on polished scale like a clasp around cosmic bracelet. Here the ripple hesitates, unsure whether to proceed or bow. The serpent solves the question by shifting its bite a millimeter, allowing seawater to slip into the gap before closing again with the gentlest click. That sounds smaller than a pebble. Landing on moss travels outward in perfect rings, each ring thinner, quieter, but somehow more convincing than the one before. They ascend through a strait of stillness, past the sardine region, ripple across the whale songs, and eventually tap the underside of awaiting storms. Thunder startles, misplacing a rumble, then carries on, deciding the ocean has cleared its throat. Politely, when the rings fade, only calm remains, thicker than when all this began, as though quiet has been folded over itself, stitched and ironed flat dot down in the darker blue. The ripple's original body relaxes into anonymity. Warm eddies collect its last flecks and translate it into breathable lullaby for smaller fish. Currents re-establish boundaries with courteous nods. The serpent tests the circle's tension once, twice, deems world still comfortably held, and stills every muscle until each becomes an invitation to do the same. If your thoughts remain awake, let them imagine that micro-click echoing behind your ribs, barely a sound, more a suggestion that edges can move gently without breaking anything. Feel each breath slide around the next like coils adjusting for perfect rest. Ragnarok's ripple has come and gone, leaving no chaos, just a slightly deeper hush lined with bronze certainties and silver maybes. Hold that hush, tuck it beneath eyelids, and know the end of everything can wait. The serpent has tightened its embrace by precisely the amount needed to cradle the next dream. You might not expect the end of days to arrive dressed as a lullaby, yet this evening an almost song hums through the deepest blue, soft enough that even krill lean in, as if the ocean itself were tucking them under one last quilt. Somewhere above, stars begin their usual roll call, unaware they are about to be politely excused from further duty. If your eyelids hover half open while this hush unfurls, you can still tap the discreet rune that promises future bedtimes, though if you drift off first, the universe will count your slumber as impeccable timing. The first hush settles on Jörmungandr's coils like featherweight frost, a thin, shimmering glaze of silence that smooths every ridge and ridgelet. One slow exhale issues from the serpent long enough to circle a continent and still leave. Breath to spare, and water around it calms as though obeying a well-worn bedtime command. In that pause, the lullaby finds its keynote, a single vibration lower than tectonic gossip, higher than magma's sigh, balanced exactly between being and refusing to be. The tone slips outward, brushing trenches that spent millennia perfecting. Stillness. They answer with a resonance of their own, turning the lullaby into a duet between depth and deeper. Coral skeletons long since surrendered to chalky peace begin to glow faintly, each polyp lending one dusty syllable to the choir. Farther up, a sleeping pod of narwhals drifts through gradients of the song. Their dreams shift from ice green chase scenes to soft gray loops where even pursuit forgets the goal. Above them, a fleet of midnight seabirds coasts on updrafts that have lost interest in rising, wings half folded, allowing gravity to do the small print. The lullaby passes straight through feathers and hides inside hollow bones, waiting for the next heartbeat to carry it farther. Jörmungandr senses the widening chorus, curling back like surf in reverse. The serpent opens one eye, or perhaps imagines. Doing so, the gesture alone is enough for scales along its spine to shimmer bronze, silver, then hush into matte calm. Around the enormous loop, currents that once hurried toward distant estuaries pause mid-errand, suddenly content to drift nowhere. In particular, a school of sardines, practiced in synchronized anxiety, simply stops, turning their collective silvery bodies into a slow-turning mobile that casts moon-pale speckles across the serpent's flank. Tiny plankton seize the moment to stage their annual light show 6 months ahead of schedule. They blink lavender, then blush, then dim to a decorous pearl, each micro-flash spelling a syllable of gratitude. The sea translates into darker peace. The melody finds its second movement here, deep, in the still water where pressure keeps secrets and time keeps forgiving them. It gains texture like velvet rubbed the wrong way, soft but insistent, reminding all listeners that circles eventually prefer straight lines of rest. A wrecked longship lying at tilt across a sandy ridge creaks once, a complaint so old it has forgot the cause, and then the timbers settle flush against each other, joints shrugging into perfect fit. Its iron nails offer tiny dings sub-oceanic chimes that answer the lullaby with subdued applause. One by one, lost coins resting in the silted bilge flip themselves shiny side down, hiding portraits of forgotten kings from any further light. Meanwhile, the serpent inhales, drawing more hush into cavernous lungs than most storms exhale in their lifetime, and the world above seems to sink a fraction, as if the planet itself were lowering its voice. When that breath releases, the third passage begins a tonal shift, so gentle it might be mistaken for the silence between steps rather than the step itself. Coastal cliffs far away shudder imperceptibly, releasing powdery chips of stone that fall straight downward, refusing to echo. Rivers upstream sense the hush and slow their chatter to murmurs no louder than moss secrets. In distant meadows, cows lift drowsy heads, wondering why the grass has decided to hum lullabies through their hooves. High in Asgard, even Thor lowers his mug mid-boast, hearing something that makes thunder question the merits of punctuation. The lullaby creeps through every gap in every realm, too polite to push, too persistent to ignore. Metronomes of mortal ambition tick once, then forget the next beat. Nightmares, confused by the absence of edge, roll over and locate softer chores dot down in the cradle of Midgard's embrace. Jörmungandr feels the circle tighten not in alarm, but in affectionate closure. The serpent's tail slides farther, into its own jaws until the bite finds a perfect notch, a silent click that locks the loop like a well-made clasp. At that moment, the lullaby reaches full bloom, neither louder nor faster, simply complete. Water stirs enough to lift a ribbon of bubbles from the serpent's nostrils. They rise, align, and burst precisely where moonlight would kiss them, if moonlight still cared to stay awake. Each pop releases a puff of hush that riddles the upper dark with invisible feathers. On shorelines, waves withdraw a step and never quite come back, leaving tide lines drawn in modest size. Fires in distant hearths gutter low, uncertain whether. Warmth is still desirable, and embers settle into ash without complaint. Now the final sweep. The lullaby's cadence eases toward a rest, so long it might masquerade as forever. In the mid-sea dusk, barnacles shut their doors. Sea stars freeze in elegant poses, and even restless tectonic plates consider calling it a night. The serpent completes one last measured breath, an inhale that gathers the remaining stray noises of creation, an exhale that sets them carefully into the quiet, like books slid into place on an infinite shelf. The song has no grand crescendo. It simply ceases to need itself. Runes etched on the buried shard flicker once in acknowledgement, not an alarm, and go dark, satisfied the final couplet has been whispered, even if no ear remains to parse. If your own breath is still trailing behind, let it match the ebb of that last exhale. Feel muscles loosen the way continents loosen their grip on sunrise. Allow thoughts to coil inward, small serpents seeking their own tail nibbles of completion. The world, having curled into a lull too perfect for punctuation, invites you to do the same. There may be dawns and other tellings, storms and other melodies, but inside this hush, only one rhythm persists, the heartbeat you carry, slowing until it merges with the tremorless dark where nothing stirs, not even time deciding what comes next. Let that merging cradle you past stories and beyond endings into the gentlest blank, where silence itself goes to dream.